My name is Marco Brizzi. I am founder at Image and at the Architecture Player. I am architecture professor. I live in Florence, Italy. Well, I'm gonna have to go back a little bit. In the early 90s, new digital tools started being largely available among architects, and the internet was born as well. Those things, among others, were promising new opportunities in architectural production and expression as well. And suddenly, new questions inevitably arose at the time, especially for an architecture student, as I was, strongly stimulated on communication issues, by the way. And media were becoming part of a diffuse system was operative structures were definitely open for architects to intertwine with their own actions and ideas. I was there at that time, and it was when I started directing a unique editorial space on the web, born in 1995. Archit has been one of the first magazines dedicated to architecture on the internet. That historical moment, in some ways, the possibility for architects to produce digital models that quickly evolved from study models to media objects was given, which was very a dramatic change. It was also the time of the birth of the internet magazines, blogs, and later architectural repositories. A new landscape was arising. It was also the time of the subsequent evolution of traditional magazines, which were questioning themselves about their own role and form. And more in general, what emerged was the often deceptive feeling for architects to have the possibility to directly intervene in the architectural discourse through advanced media actions. In this context, my team and I began to take for our first steps under the name of Image in the world of architectural communication. And based on past and current experiences, we have tried to interpret the need to carefully build relationship between those who design and those who publish projects, offering different readings and thus encouraging their understanding. Well, the Beyond Media Festival and the Architecture Player are different projects, but both animated by the same interest for the evolution of the architectural expression and its capacity to also generate new consequences in the production of architecture and also in its public comprehension. The first was an incredible adventure born out of recklessness and resourcefulness. From 1997 to 2009, Beyond Media has been an event in constant growth and evolution, in search for emerging themes of the most representative works that were born from the comparison between architecture and the media. At the center of it, amidst exhibitions, installations, symposia, and meetings, there was an international selection of videos and short films made by architects or produced by them. This is the focal point of our very research. We were also, of course, interested in architectural documentaries, but the focus was exactly there, to look for what architects were in the possibility to do with the new tools and with the language they produced in the meantime. So over the years, that vision and the passion collection of selected works has generated an impressive archive, which in 2015 gave rise to the Architecture Player project. This is both an expression of that archive and also the idea is for it to be a magazine. Videos are offered here are introduced one by one, but they can be read in comparison in a sort of a critical playlist guided by an essay, thanks to the intervention of commentators that we invite. Its specificity, in order to answer your question, again, is precisely that of focusing attention on videos as an architect's tool, as a means to search for new forms of expression and also for a constructive narrative. Well, I don't know what the answers of my colleagues might be. I'm very curious to also listen to their presentations. But in any case, I will not mention a specific case, but one of the modes that have emerged in the early years of the new millennium. I was there, of course, and I was very curious to see what was happening with the festival mainly. And that have had the ability to renovate the gaze on architecture, including for the more general public. It's the films that recount the built works of architecture in their daily life, in their use and its consumption, by the way. So this mode was stigmatized by a film that made history, Scola's House Life by Ila Beck and Louis Lemoine, made in 2007 and presented in Venice Biennale in 2008. And then it gave birth to a highly successful film series, Living Architecture series. Well, to a lower level, when it's the case of architects to make films, it was also an attitude that was similar to this. There are various traces that interpret this way of doing by observing the conditions of the so-called post-occupancy, and that put at stake the life of a place, people, stories that link them to the architecture they inhabit. That's fundamental. And that also had consequences in the other media. Not directly consequences, but also printed magazines reflected this way of doing, and they started being more interested in the life of buildings more than their formal aspects. Well, from my point of view, the point of view of a professor of architecture and also a person who is culturally engaged in the evolution of the way architects are exploiting media possibilities, there are many cases that are highlighting something negative or something that I do regret for, even though I don't complain for them, of course, but I do observe these phenomena. And moving on from the case of the video, I could mention a vast editorial production, which I've seen dozens and dozens of younger groups of architects experiment, especially at the end of the last century, media production, which was the novelty at that time, which was, as I said before, a new field of exploration that involved many, many people. So a vast wealth of ideas and propositions full of expectations and hopes, at least until the year 2000, which have sometimes suffered the consequences of a much less gratifying diffusion and reception than they have had initially hoped for. So there are many interrupted dreams, if you want, many cases in which the media have taken the form of a mirage for many architects. I do regret for that, but I also consider that period a period of richness in ideas. Somebody will recover them sooner or later. For which reason is not present is probably a harder question for me to answer, but I can tell you that there is a challenge that certainly affects architecture. I started wrong. I I can hardly answer the first part of the question because mechanisms are so complex. But I can tell you that there is a challenge that certainly affects architecture. This challenge is about going public. And first of all, for the numbers, we are talking about publications that tend to have much more readers than specialized publishing do. There are also market reasons. This is connected to my first point. And also, there is a third reason, in my opinion, for architects to look for being published on cultural sections of news media. And it's that there is a widespread opinion, often fed by a true mythography of heroism, in my opinion, that the best professional reputation can be only conferred by being considered at the public level and mentioned outside the usual field of action. I understand this, of course. I understand the reasons for this attitude. Although I think that a frequent disdain for confrontation within the disciplinary field undermines the professionalism itself, which instead needs constant and constructive dialogue. So I have some doubts when I see architects who are only looking for the possibility to go publishing on the main newspapers and magazines, and they do disdain the possibility to really have a dialogue with other professionals and with media at the professional level.